Microsoft has taken a very everybody game together approach for the last few years, trying to obtain as many software licenses as possible and then subsequently making them as available as possible. Launching their games on the PlayStation Network, even the eShop, pretty much, every Xbox game is 100% expected to release on Steam. Do I hear myself? I wrote the video title, right? It really does feel kind of ironic to start an Xbox bad discussion by listing, I guess, their hyper pro-consumer tactics, but they really do feel related to their downfall. The broad console manufacturer formula is make a cool device that plays games, charge developers, various fees to release and sell games on that device, and then your benefits scale as more users and developers interact with your device. That sounds simple. Until, someone else makes a cool device as well. Now you need to give a reason that your device is cooler than theirs. This was expressed, in graphical quality, many different scaling bits, storage, online features, all the bells and whistles, you name it. And while some of that mattered, especially earlier on, what was always, king for determining the coolest console? The games. Exclusive video game releases are the historical bread and butter of selling your game console. If the most fun, the most hyped title can only be played on your device, you bet you're selling some consoles. Nintendo are the kings of this, and practically compete in their own realm, to be honest. A new Pokémon release is historically guaranteed to bump Nintendo's console sales into relevancy, and it's no wonder every Nintendo console launch comes with a new Mario game attached to the hip. You aren't playing that shit on Xbox, or PlayStation, or PC. Xbox and Microsoft knew this to be true from their inception. Halo was the Xbox seller in my neck of the woods, and any other console to these gamers was filth in comparison. Gears of War was another one. It moved units. Back in the early 2000s, you'd get Japanese releases like Ninja Gaiden exclusive to the Xbox. The Xbox was competitive when it came to exclusives. They played the exclusives game and knew a unique experience was the difference maker when it came to checkout. Microsoft, being, nearly synonymous with personal computers, have a long history of releasing their games on the PC, but they kept a very real barrier in place. You bet the fully, Microsoft published titles that I mentioned before, like, Halo and Gears of War, hell, even Forza, were not going to be put on the PC in the era of the Xbox or the Xbox 360. These games sold consoles, dude. It wasn't worth the short-term single-game sale boost to give, gamers a reason not to buy an Xbox. Sure, maybe they'll throw some titles with lower expectations to the plebs, but, not the big-budget stuff. That was the status quo. But the Xbox One launch was right around the corner, and the criticism awaiting Microsoft wasn't going to be limited to just the obtuse naming convention. Microsoft decided to throw decades of the console marketing playbook out the window with the launch of the Xbox One. Remember how in the early days the competition had more focus on the bells and whistles, and what really mattered in the end, were the games? Well, Microsoft put all their skill points into nonsense when it came to the Xbox One. Whether it was the emphasis on entertainment, or abusive always online business practices attempting to control ownership of games, or maybe it was the mandatory Kinect it came bundled with, Microsoft committed the cardinal sin though. They didn't focus on the games. Coming out of the Xbox One's painful launch with, Don Matic on the way out and Phil Spencer on the way in, Microsoft was beginning to realize, hey, those games sure do matter. There was still obvious plans to get new and old titles exclusive to the platform, but it seemed ownership, that was rubbing Spencer the wrong way still. Hey, game rentals are cool, right? And the cloud is kind of good by now. I've got an idea for a pivot. Xbox Game Pass launched in 2017 as a reported brainchild of Phil Spencer at a time where Microsoft needed ideas, and subscription services were in full-scale adoption mode with both music and television. I can't fully fault the guy for seeing the obvious parallel when it came to games, right? It's just another entertainment service. That was enough of a comparison for them. The seed was planted. So how do we get people on the Game Pass? which is effectively a new console, by the way. I just want to put it out there. Microsoft started planning Game Pass in the wake of their previous console launch failing. Where someone like Nintendo shits the bed with the Wii U and comes out, swinging with the Switch. Microsoft's thought process wasn't how to make the next one better, because Xbox Game Pass was the de facto next console. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they just gave up on hardware. Okay, sorry. So how do we get people onto the Game Pass? It's all well and good to say subscription services aren't thriving in the entertainment industry, but it's also no mystery adoption rate is everything. Everything. Well, if Game Pass is de facto a new console, how do we get people to switch over to ours? It's almost like we're full circle, because Microsoft determined the answer was the games. The easiest steps out the gate were to make Microsoft published games available on the Game Pass. So anything Xbox exclusive, boom, now it's Game Pass exclusive. Nice, that should pad out the numbers for marketing. Okay, but we need something big and new. Sea of Thieves. You guys remember Sea of Thieves, right? This was effectively going to be Microsoft's, Game Pass launch title. And I won't lie, it was a pretty fucking good game. But it took forever to become, a full game, through patches, and it's besides the point. That's a gamble to make, one game and hope it's your Halo. At least roll the dice a few more times. You've got the capital, right? So Microsoft are in a bind. Adoption is everything, and that new KPI issued from the top comes with complimentary blinders. And shoot, giving away games only seems to be getting us as far as we got the Epic Store, which is to say, accounts created, sitting unused, especially when your gaming lineup has turned into a grave site, only being visited by your geriatric fans with memories of a better time. So Microsoft's rhetoric, of course, starts to fully change, and now the Game Pass is on, every console. Wouldn't it be great if you could give Microsoft their cut for even more devices? This messaging was one big chunky nail in the coffin when it comes to answering the question, is it worth it to buy an Xbox? Well, not if the games are available everywhere else. And we're almost caught up to present day. Game Pass is truly Microsoft's lead console, only releasing companion hardware that also got a price hike, by the way, to go through the motions, right? 35 million users. Game Pass is reported to having 35 million subscribers. Is that active at one time? Is that over the history of the platform? I don't know for sure, but it seems the adoption rate has hit a milestone where Microsoft are taking the next step from the entertainment subscription playbook and hiking the price up for Game Pass. Welcome the user into the ecosystem and charge them to stay. The community response is of course negative, and I'm not going to correctly predict if this consumer backlash will evolve into a boycott and even mean anything to a Microsoft suit. But really, the biggest conclusion I can come to is Xbox has no idea how to correct course, and when they prosper, it will often be in spite of their own actions.